For nearly 30 years, one question has refused to disappear. What if Princess Diana knew something was coming? Not a vague fear. Not simply the pressure of being one of the most famous women in the world, but something so serious that, according to the account we are examining, she allegedly warned her sister, protected private documents, and even spoke about the possibility of a fatal accident. Then Diana died in Paris. And suddenly, every word she had reportedly spoken before her death seemed far more frightening. But there is one moment that stands above the rest. A private confrontation at Highgrove. Diana, Charles, Camilla, and a few whispered words that, according to this account, changed Diana's expression from anger to fear. What exactly was said? Why did Diana allegedly rush to her room afterward? And why did she hand her sister a sealed envelope with instructions to keep it safe? Tonight, we're going back through that story. But there is an important warning. Some of the claims surrounding Diana's final years remain disputed or unproven. So, we are separating the documented tragedy from the allegations and theories that grew around it. Because sometimes the mystery is not what we know. It is what we can never prove. And this story begins long before Paris. It begins inside the Spencer family. Before Diana became Princess of Wales, before the wedding watched by millions, there was another Spencer sister whose life briefly crossed paths with Prince Charles. Her name was Lady Sarah McCorquodale. Sarah had once been romantically linked with Charles. And through that connection, Diana eventually met the man who would become her husband. It was an ordinary meeting with extraordinary consequences. Diana was still very young. But within a few years, she would become one of the most famous women on earth. In 1981, the world watched her marry Charles. The ceremony looked like a fairy tale. The dress, the crowds, the cameras, the future princess smiling beneath the weight of a global audience. But behind that image, the marriage would become increasingly difficult. By the 1990s, the fairy tale had fractured. Charles and Diana were separated. Their private problems were now public entertainment. And Diana found herself trapped inside a strange world where almost nothing remained private. The press followed her. Photographers waited outside. Her relationships became headlines. Her movements became stories. And, according to the account in our source material, Diana began to believe that even information shared privately could reach the public. She reportedly told Sarah that she felt watched. She worried about conversations. She worried about her movements. And most importantly, she worried about who could be trusted. Sarah was faced with a painful problem. Was Diana genuinely in danger? Or was years of pressure beginning to affect her sense of security? At first, Sarah reportedly struggled to tell the difference. And who could blame her? Diana had been through a deeply painful marriage. She was constantly surrounded by cameras. Every argument could become tomorrow's headline. Every mistake could become a national scandal. So Sarah tried to believe that Diana's fears were simply the result of exhaustion. But then the warnings became more specific. According to the account, Diana began using unusual phrases in private notes. She allegedly avoided writing certain names directly. Instead, she used descriptions. The puppeteer, the shadow, the person behind the curtain. These details make the story sound almost like a thriller. But Diana's real life was already dramatic enough. She was living under enormous public pressure. And her relationship with the royal establishment remained intensely complicated. Then came Highgrove. This is where the story takes a darker turn. Picture the setting. A royal garden, quiet paths, carefully maintained flowers. Everything appearing peaceful from the outside. But according to Sarah's alleged recollection, something deeply uncomfortable was happening away from public view. Charles and Camilla were together. Diana saw them, and something inside her finally broke. For years, she had tried to control her emotions, but now she confronted them. Her anger was visible. Her pain was impossible to hide. And according to the account, Charles did not respond with the emotion Diana expected. Instead, he appeared cold and dismissive. He allegedly signaled for Diana to leave. But then came the moment that Sarah reportedly could never forget. Camilla moved toward Diana. She leaned closer, and she whispered something directly into Diana's ear. Sarah could not hear it. That detail is important, because no verified record in the supplied transcript tells us exactly what those words were. Everything after that depends on the account being described. But according to that account, Diana's reaction was immediate. Her anger vanished. Her face changed. The confidence disappeared. She suddenly looked frightened. Imagine watching someone go from furious to terrified in only a few seconds. That is what Sarah allegedly witnessed. And if the story is accurate, Diana never explained exactly what had been said. Instead, she left. Hours later, Sarah reportedly found her sister alone. Diana was shaken, but she was not simply crying. She was preparing. She reached beneath the mattress and pulled out a sealed envelope. Then she placed it into Sarah's hands. The message was simple: keep it safe. Sarah allegedly understood that this was more than an ordinary collection of letters. Diana appeared to believe the material might become important. Maybe she feared that someone would try to take it. Maybe she simply wanted someone she trusted to have it. Or perhaps, as the story claims, she was preparing for a future she feared might never arrive. That envelope became one of the central mysteries in this account. What was inside? Letters? Private notes? Something else? The transcript presents it as evidence of Diana's fears. But without independently verified documentation, we cannot treat every detail as established fact. Still, the story does not end there. The year was moving toward 1997, and Diana's life was changing again. To the public, she looked free. She traveled. She spent time with her children. She continued humanitarian work. She was photographed smiling. But privately, according to the account, she remained deeply unsettled. Sarah reportedly remembered Diana checking rooms, checking doors, watching windows, lowering her voice during conversations. And there was one subject that affected her more than anything else: her boys, William, Harry. Diana's fear was reportedly no longer only about herself. It was about what would happen to her sons if she disappeared. She allegedly asked Sarah to stay close to them, to protect them, to be there if something happened. Those words would become devastating after Diana's death, because only months later, the unthinkable happened. Paris, August 1997. Diana was staying at the Ritz Hotel. She left the hotel with Dodi Al-Fayed. Photographers were waiting. The car moved through the streets. The paparazzi followed. Then the Mercedes entered the Ponta El Alma tunnel. And everything changed. The crash was catastrophic. Diana was critically injured. She later died. The world was stunned. Millions mourned. The woman who had seemed almost larger than life was suddenly gone. For Sarah, the tragedy carried another layer of pain, because she remembered Diana's earlier fears. According to the account, Diana had once spoken about the possibility of a car accident. Now she had actually died in one. That connection haunted Sarah. But this is where we must slow down. A prediction followed by a tragedy does not, by itself, prove that the tragedy was planned. And the official investigations did not establish the royal conspiracy described in this account. The crash remains a heavily discussed historical event, but speculation is not the same as proof. Still, Sarah reportedly could not escape the feeling that she had missed something. She remembered the warnings, the letters, the envelope, the strange conversations, and, according to the story, hidden recordings. This is where the account becomes even more dramatic. It claims that Sarah eventually discovered cassette tapes that Diana had allegedly left behind. She reportedly listened to them alone. And what she heard, according to the story, shocked her. The tapes allegedly contained conversations involving powerful people and discussions about Diana's reputation and personal life. If genuine and properly authenticated, such material would obviously be significant. But the source transcript does not provide independent verification of these recordings. So we cannot present them as proven evidence. What we can examine is why such claims became so powerful. Because Diana's public image had already been under intense pressure. She had spoken openly about her struggles. She had criticized the royal system. She had become independent from the institution. and she had an enormous relationship with the public. That created a complicated situation. The palace wanted stability. The press wanted stories. Diana wanted freedom. And millions of people wanted to know what was really happening behind closed doors. Then came the accident. Afterward, theories exploded. Some people believed the crash was simply a terrible combination of reckless driving and an aggressive paparazzi pursuit. Others suspected something more deliberate. The theories became part of Diana's legacy. But Sarah's alleged memories added another emotional layer. She reportedly began looking back at everything, not just the night of the crash, but years before it. She remembered Diana's fear. She remembered how carefully she had spoken. She remembered the envelope. And she remembered the Highgrove confrontation, the whispered words, the sudden fear. Could all of these events really be connected? Or was Sarah, like many grieving relatives, trying to make sense of an unbearable loss? That question matters, because grief can change the way we remember the past. When something terrible happens, the human mind naturally searches for warning signs. We ask ourselves, did we miss something? Was there something we should have noticed? Could we have prevented it? Sarah reportedly carried those questions for years. And perhaps that is why silence eventually became impossible. The account describes her as an older woman carrying decades of memories. Memories that had never fully disappeared. Then came the alleged decision to speak. She reportedly opened an old leather case. Inside were documents, letters, tapes, material connected to Diana's private life. The image is almost cinematic. A quiet room, an old case, yellowed papers, a sister finally deciding that she could no longer remain silent. But what happened next? According to the story, the alleged revelations created a wave of public outrage. Diana's name returned to the center of international attention. Questions about Charles and Camilla resurfaced. People began asking whether Diana had known she was in danger, whether her warnings had been ignored, whether the royal family had known more than it admitted, and whether the tragedy in Paris could somehow have been prevented. But again, we must separate the emotional story from the evidence. There is no established proof in the supplied material that Camilla ordered Diana's death. There is no established proof that the royal family organized the crash. And there is no verified basis here for claiming that a secret network deliberately arranged the accident. Those are allegations and theories, not proven facts. Yet there is one reason these stories continue to attract attention. Diana really did have a complicated relationship with the monarchy. She really did experience enormous media pressure. She really did become separated from Charles. And she really did die in a shocking crash while being pursued by photographers. The tragedy itself requires no conspiracy to be heartbreaking. Sometimes reality is already devastating enough. But imagine being her sister. Imagine hearing someone you love say, "Something might happen to me." Then imagine losing that person months later. You would replay every conversation, every warning, every strange moment, every sentence. And you would probably ask yourself the same question again and again. Why didn't I do more? That may have been Sarah's greatest burden. Not simply grief. Guilt. The belief that perhaps she should have taken Diana more seriously. Perhaps she should have demanded answers. Perhaps she should have protected the documents differently. Perhaps she should have spoken sooner. But hindsight is cruel. Because before the tragedy, no one knew what the future held. Diana's fears could have remained fears. The accident could have been avoided. Her life could have continued. William and Harry could have grown up with their mother. History could have taken an entirely different path. Instead, one night in Paris changed everything. And the consequences continue to this day. William and Harry grew up without their mother. Charles eventually became king. Camilla eventually became queen. The monarchy moved forward. But Diana remained part of its story. Her memory never disappeared. And neither did the questions. What happened during her final weeks? What did she really fear? Who did she trust? What was inside the alleged envelope? Did the alleged recordings exist? And perhaps most importantly, why did so many people continue to believe that there was something hidden behind the official story? There may never be a satisfying answer to every question. And that is what makes this story so powerful. Not because every theory is true, but because one woman died under extraordinary circumstances, leaving behind a world that was never quite the same again. Diana's life had already transformed the monarchy. Her death transformed it again. She had shown the world a different kind of royal life. More emotional, more open, more connected to ordinary people. She challenged expectations. She broke traditions. And she became a symbol far beyond Britain. That is why her death remains so difficult for people to accept. The princess who seemed impossible to silence was suddenly gone. And in the silence that followed, theories filled the space. Some were reasonable, some were speculative, some were completely unsupported. But all of them came from the same human desire. The desire to understand. The desire to find a reason. The desire to believe that such a terrible ending must have an explanation that makes sense. Maybe there is one. Maybe there isn't. What we do know is that Diana was under extraordinary pressure. What we do know is that the paparazzi pursued the car. What we do know is that she died in Paris in August 1997. And what we also know is that her family and the world were left to deal with the consequences. Everything beyond that must be approached carefully. Because the most responsible way to tell Diana's story is not to turn every allegation into fact. It is to examine the mystery while remembering the difference between evidence and speculation. And perhaps that is the real reason this story still matters. Because Diana was not just a headline. She was a sister, a daughter, a mother, and a woman who lived under an amount of public attention that few people could understand. Her final chapter remains painful. Her legacy remains enormous. And her memory remains impossible to erase. So now, after all these years, the question comes back to you. Do you believe Diana's reported warnings were simply the fears of a woman living under extreme pressure? Or do you think some of the unanswered details deserve another look? And if you were Sarah, carrying those memories for decades, would you have stayed silent to protect the family? Or would you have spoken sooner? Tell us what you think in the comments. And if you want more royal stories, hidden history, unanswered questions, and dramatic moments from behind the palace walls, subscribe to Crown Nora Updates. Because sometimes history gives us answers. And sometimes it leaves us with one question that refuses to disappear.